Hello. Today I am going to talk a little bit about a video that I just watched, which I thought was brilliant, by Warren Farrell. He's the man who wrote The Myth of Male Power. And Warren Farrell, he used to be, I believe it was one of the presidents, chapter presidents or something like that, of the National Organization for Women. And he was a major feminist supporter until he started opening dialogue with men during these meetings and noticing that he was blaming them for most of the problems, and that every time that a man started to talk about his feelings or what was happening with himself, he would be shot down by the entire group, or after a while, if there wasn't anything that could be argued with the man, then everyone would just say that he was part of the patriarchy and that was part of the problem. So this video is very specific. It's very specific. This video is on masculine love and what that is, what that means in a cultural context. So these are a few points that Farrell brings up in the video, and I think that they're very good points. And as a man, I can speak from personal experience towards some of these. But basically, Farrell talks about how men are raised in a way that makes them immediately disposable to themselves. You learn very on as a child. You learn very early as a male child that people appreciating you and loving you is contingent on your own pain. So that could be organized sports as a child, doing football or getting injured playing baseball or whatever, and that sort of thing kind of builds as the years go on. You watch movies and you see that the heroes are usually a man that will sacrifice every single thing that he has for his woman. That women they tend to be saintly, and there's something to be protected at the expense of your own life or your own happiness or your own well-being. And I'll get into this a little bit with another video that I'm going to shoot a little bit later on romance and romance movies and how this relates to this particular topic and men and how they play into it and our cultural perception of what men are supposed to be, what a good man is supposed to be. But for the most part, we see this over and over and over again. When men turn 18, they're required to sign up for selective service. They're required to potentially put their life on the line in a military scenario at some point. If a draft is reinstated, that sort of thing, they may have to go and fight just because they're men, not necessarily because of any other factor, just because they happen to have male genitalia. And we don't look at that necessarily as a culture. We tend to think of ourselves living in a patriarchal type culture, but the definition of a patriarchy is that a patriarchy serves men at the exclusion of women, although women are suffering greater and greater levels of depression, men kill themselves, they commit suicide at vastly higher numbers than women do. And those numbers of female depression have gone up significantly since women have started really integrating themselves into the labor force and really trying to move up through the ranks. More and more women graduating from higher education and those sort of things, kind of realms that used to be the realms of men, and now women are starting to integrate those areas and they're starting to become more and more depressed. There's a growing contingency of women having children later and later and later, because they may or may not feel like they can have both a career and have children, or they can feel like they only have part-time and they don't, and they need to have a career now because they need the money. So, but that is beside the point. It has not very much to do necessarily with masculine love and the way that men express love. Men are taught to learn that your sacrifice is what is most important. So again, going to those movies, we can look at a movie like Ghost, where Patrick Swayze pretty early on is murdered, and for most of the film he is still trying to protect his wife. Even though he's dead, he's still trying to protect his wife from the Tony Goldwyn character, the evil man character that's coming in and has killed him. And so his devotion lasts past the point of his physical body. It's his love is so undying that it is literally undying and spreads to a more metaphysical type of realm. We see a movie like Pretty Woman, which is ranked as one of the highest romance films of all time, where Richard Gere, very successful, very important business person, he sees a prostitute that he likes, and he gives her a bunch of things and buys her a bunch of things, and then eventually he falls for her, and he ends up wanting to really, really be with her, because even a prostitute has that level of rise in a man's eyes. And I think that is one of the main points of the film, is that every woman is okay. Every woman has the potential to be on that high level, whereas there's not a lot of films like that for men. I mean, we could look at things like The Pursuit of Happiness, but in that film, most of the film is about how he's been making so many mistakes, and how he's a bumbling man who ends up becoming successful because of his drive and his persistence. But we also have to look at how we associate love with success, and that is a male issue. It's a male and a female issue, because if a woman is going to be attracted to a man and want to be with a man and marry a man and have children with that man, she's going to rely on him to be successful. And the more successful he is, the more money he is producing, or the more secure he is making that particular household, which means that he's going to have to work more, which means that he is going to associate love and loving of his family and his wife and everything else with not being there, not being around, working hard and not being there. He is distancing himself from the family unit in order to try and provide them with what he feels they accept him for, that they love him for the fact that he works so hard. And we can see this across many cultures, but most especially in Western culture, most especially in America, that a man is worth what he can provide, and that is the type of love that we give him, is a respect and an adoration for what the man can provide. However, we don't necessarily respect his need to express himself and to be a nurturer and to be alone with children, to be with them and take care of them. If the female wants to go out and she wants to be the primary breadwinner, we respect that less if he's going to be a stay-at-home dad. And so and we may respect a woman equally as much whether she wants to be a career woman or if she wants to be a stay-at-home mom. So there's a disconnect of what it means to love men. There's a disconnect because we don't respect men for who they are. We respect them for what we want them to be, and the higher the amount of sacrifice that they can make, the larger amount of sacrifice is what correlates in our mind how much that a man particularly loves us. Now, we get to a certain point, a breaking point, where when we get above that level of sacrifice and above a certain level of for lack of a better word, abandonment, that there is no emotional connection with the man anymore, and that marriage is over, that raising of those children is over. And we see it more and more and more. We see it as men work harder and harder and more women enter the workforce, you know, divorce rates are extremely high. They're extremely high. It's about 6 out of 10 marriages these days end in divorce. So we have to look at what that is, why we feel that men are worth less than women are. Why do we feel that men are more disposable than women are? Why is it that men tend to take the harder jobs, tend to take the jobs that are more dangerous, tend to take the jobs that will kill them more often, tend to volunteer primarily? About 99.8% of firefighters, volunteer firefighters, are men. Tend to take the jobs in coal mines, tend to take the jobs that will kill them over time. And why we feel the need as a society to say that they are heroes in order to take those jobs. If the definition for heroism was changed from love in relationship, from sacrifice and glory as a death in battle, or a death in your pursuit, a death in your job, a death in your career. The Japanese, even have a word for it, because they commit suicide or die on the job from extra stress all of the time. The men die all of the time from the extra pressure and work that they put on themselves. If we can take that glory of heroism, of death and sacrifice, to sacrifice one's own physicality, mentality, their own spirituality, their own emotions, which everyone knows you don't want to hear a man talk about his emotions. That automatically makes him a weaker man. It makes him less attractive. Not always, but most of the time. At least initially, when couples initially get together, most women don't want to know how a man feels about any particular thing, unless she just happens to be someone who likes hearing people talk about the way they feel. But then, if that's the case, that is the attraction factor, and she's going to want to hear him talk about his feelings all of the time, because that's what initially, brought them together. So we have to look at why we separate men from love, and why we separate feelings and expression of feelings for men when we do not do that for women. So why can we be supportive of women in a way that lifts them up and props them up and gives them outlets for the things they need, and helps them with social problems that they may or may not have, and helps them build themselves as a person? And then we look at men, and they're only expected to work. They're not expected to do anything except for work, and to grind it out, and to make money, and not argue with the way that we're expecting them to be. And so what is that about men? What is that about love for men, and why we associate sacrifice with love, and why we associate sacrifice with heroism even? We can look at, the men that are in the military. We can call them heroes, but we're asking for them to sacrifice in order to be a hero, in order to have the title. We can say the same thing about, high-risk SWAT officers, and we could say the same thing about firemen. We could say the same thing about coal miners. We can say the same thing about, dangerous people in electrician jobs, dangerous electrical jobs. We can say the same thing about window washers that hang off of the top of buildings and off of the needles, and and paint the antennas and do all of the things that they do overhanging over the edges of skyscrapers. When the wind blows and they blow out over the edge of the skyscraper, and they're hooked in with a little carabiner and some bungee cords. So we have to look at why are men so willing to sacrifice themselves. Why is it that on the Titanic, 70, I can't remember if it was 74 or 78% of the passengers, that were women survived, and only 18% of the male passengers survived. Now, obviously, most of the male passengers were upper crust. They were high. They were brought off earlier than the rest of the poor working class type passengers that were on the ships. And it was because of a policy of women and children first. Now, some would say that entire mentality is a patriarchal type mentality, that chivalrous mentality of, we're going to take women and say that they are less important than other men. They are actually equal to children. That completely misses the point of a masculine psychology when we're talking about this, or masculine depth of feeling, or anything like that. It ignores a masculine depth of feeling, which is not congruent with patriarchy whatsoever. What it says, and what it really is that men value women and children more than they value their own health and safety. They value them more. Not that they feel like they are lesser than, they value them more. They know that if women survive, there's a chance for more. That if a woman goes out and she is able to live, then that's better for the village than 5 men dying. Okay, now there's some cultures in the world that have this kind of skewed and twisted around, China being one of them. But even they are starting to realize that we need more women, so that rigid structure of this is only supposed to be a certain way ends up becoming something that brings us away from connecting together as men and women. This idea that men have to be a certain way, and also this idea that women are supposed to be unconditionally, supportive and loving and everything like that. Not necessarily. I mean, they don't have to be. People are all different, okay? But when a woman does not support a man, it's not always the case that she will not support him, and that he will still continually support him. Usually he will continually support her. And I just said that kind of strange, but usually a man will continually support a woman, either through work or whatever, especially, like I said, jobs that are dangerous. If he has a lower education level, he might be taking more and more jobs that are dangerous. Or if he has a higher education level, he'll be taking jobs that require even more of his time. Being a lawyer, being a doctor, being an engineer, being a computer science person, being somebody that works in a lab or one of the health sciences or something like that, which requires a lot more time even. So what we find is we find a flux between what we expect of men and what is the reality for men. Most men are very unhappy. And the reason I believe that we don't see higher incidences of depression amongst men is because men don't talk about their feelings. Because from a very early age, you're told to suck it up. And that when you are hurt, that is when you are receiving adoration. When you can get knocked down and stand up and still pick the ball up and cross the line with it, if you can spin out and you run through that injury in your leg or your knee or your shoulder or your hip, and you can just keep pushing, that's what we cheer for. That's what we find heroic. We find it heroic when someone plays with an injury. We find it inspiring when a man goes off for his woman and risks everything that he has, all the money he has, his entire life, his health and his safety and his well-being. We find that inspiring, and we find it romantic, and we find it beautiful, until that man has nothing left and he can't work anymore, or until that man pushes so hard that he pushes those he loves away. And what he's trying to do is he's chasing love. He's trying to get more and more love. Everyone's trying to get more and more love all the time. But he's trying to get more and more love by excluding himself more and more and more, and isolating himself away more and more and more and more, until he's over in a position where he is not he's not needed, other than what he's making, what money he's producing, what lifestyle he's engaging in, that it's something that supports a woman or supports a family. If he's not in that position, he's oftentimes not respected. And we'll see cultural jokes about men who are stay-at-home dads. We'll see cultural jokes about men who are so sensitive. They talk about their feelings. And this is something that I believe that a feminist-minded person, especially a radical feminist or a philosophical feminist or biological feminist or whatever, that someone in that area would definitely want to support a man having more social justice and more social graces, and being able to express himself more, and being more akin to having a direct dialogue with women. However, that seems not to be the case. Instead, it is a case of, at least from what I've read and from what I've heard from other feminists, that I've talked to directly, that men are supposed to sacrifice. And the reason that they have to sacrifice so much is because of patriarchy. And the reason that there's a patriarchy is because men's primary, ultimate nature deep down is to control and have more power over everyone else, which I don't believe is the case. I believe man's primary focus, the same as women's primary focus, is to survive and take care of one another. And those may be diametrically opposed lifestyles that they leave in order to take care of one another. But it is when we try to put our expectations of who a person is and who they're supposed to be, and we define every little thing about who they're supposed to be in our minds, that we limit the possibility for who that person is. And when we limit that, a relationship is not going to work. So, if I have a job and I'm working a certain amount of hours, and I have a wife and she's expecting me to work that certain amount of hours, and then my boss starts cutting down my hours, I might be thrilled because I get to see my wife more, but she might be upset that I'm not bringing enough money in, so I might have to go and work overtime or double overtime in order to make the money back, so that she will feel secure. However, when I'm working more, she will see me less, and she will feel as if I am abandoning her. So men are really in a catch-22 when it comes to receiving love in a relationship, and most especially living with someone, receiving love in a relationship where you live with someone, because it is not socially acceptable for a man to just be with a woman. He has to continually provide for her. And this can go for gay relationships, for lesbian relationships, and transgender relationships, and those sort of things. It's not necessarily limited to one sex or the other, really. But what we're really talking about is we're talking about equality of roles, and how we still impose that kind of role onto men, that men are the sacrificers, men are the ones who are supposed to feel bad. They're supposed to do the tough stuff. They're supposed to do the hard things. They're supposed to suck it up. They're supposed to walk it off. You're supposed to be a man. You're not supposed to complain. And because men don't complain, I guarantee that those statistics about women starting to have higher incidences of depression are wrong. I can guarantee them. The fact that over, I think it's something like 300 or 400,000 men every year, and some studies say as high as 1 million men every year are raped in prisons. But very few, but only, and when I say very few, this is very relative, but only, several 100,000 are reported, has to tell us something about how men feel that they are able to express their own lives. That if something is such a pain and such a hurt and such a degradation of your spirit and of your soul, you're not allowed to tell anyone. And everyone knows the thing about the man turning 50 and having a midlife crisis and having to go out and buy a Porsche because they're living a lie. And that lie really is the inability to express yourself in the way that you want to express yourself. It's the inability to be free in your emotions and to be accepted for that instead of ridiculed. And in that way, I feel like most men are living with a low-grade form of post-traumatic stress disorder. In order for, and there's a great book by Lieutenant Dave Grossman, I believe I mentioned it before, but I'm not really sure, called On Killing, which is about the stresses of combat and how it is psychologically damaging to human beings to kill other humans, that does not exist within hunter-gatherer societies, hunting for animals and that sort of thing. We don't have that disconnect. However, psychologically, killing another human being causes a lot of extra stress and results in post-traumatic stress disorder. So in the book, he lists 2 things that are required for post-traumatic stress disorder. One is the actual event is the major stressor, and that is one factor. The second is the ability of support that person has, and they are positively or negatively correlated with one another. So you can have an extremely high amount of stressful situation, but and maybe a horrible situation that none of us would ever want to be in. But then if you have an extremely high support system that really, really supports you and really takes care of you and really honors you and cherishes you, then that level of stress and the level of stress, the way it plays out in life, goes very much down. Whereas if you have a constant level of stress and a constant level of stressors throughout your lifetime, which is something that we would call depression, because it's a constant stressor and a constant melancholia that's always underneath the surface. It's always hidden, and it's just never talked about because it's always there. If we have that constant line of melancholia and we have no support whatsoever, you have psychological problems, you have depression, and you have no basis for dialogue with someone else. So I can speak from personal experience that if a man feels like his problems are not going to be taken seriously, he's not going to say anything about it. If a man is raped, he's probably not going to say anything about it, for embarrassment and shame and guilt and confusion, psychological confusion about his place in society and whether or not he's actually a man anymore, and whether he is able to assert all of the authority that he thinks he's supposed to have, and the story that he's told himself throughout his life, which is a type of egotism, that cannot be changed, and it can't be thrown against the wall in such a way. So we have to start having more compassion for men. And I'll put a link to the talk because it was an excellent talk. It brought up a lot of different things. But I can also say from personal experience, working with a lot of men, in a counseling capacity, and also working with a lot of men, just being friends for them and being there for them. You really have to have an environment as a man that is supportive, and not supportive in a way that takes you away from how you feel about something, not supportive in a way that masks how you feel about something, but supportive in a way that encourages how you feel about something, to speak on how you feel about something and have your voice heard, a place where men can speak. And this is vitally, vitally important. It's much more important than going out and getting drunk and, talking bad about your ex-girlfriend. That's not productive. It's not positive, and it's not going to lead you somewhere that you need to go. You need to get back in touch with those feelings that you are repressing, because the feelings that you're repressing and the expression that you are repressing is causing depression. It's a low grade trauma over and over and over again. And if we're going to talk about power, and that's why I mentioned Warren Farrell's book at the very beginning of this, and like I said, I'll put his video up on here. Are you more powerful if you are making 6 figures, but you feel depressed all of the time, you never see your family, your wife is about to leave you, your children don't respect you, and you feel completely lost, and you feel like you are doing everything you're supposed to be doing, but you are not important? Your existence is not important. Are you more powerful if you're in that situation, or are you more powerful if you are happy and healthy and doing the things that you want to be doing, regardless of what those around you may or may not think about you? And so we have to start having this dialogue. We have to start thinking about what is passion, and how does that passion play out in your life, and are we able as men to speak to that passion, or do we put everything on the back burner in order to impress people with our glorious heroism of self-sacrifice? Are we sacrificing ourselves in order to impress others, be they other men or other women? Are we sacrificing ourselves? Or are we really connecting to who we are and being true to who we are and having a real experience in our lives? And if there's women out there who love their man, I highly, highly, highly encourage you to watch the video that I posted a link to, but also just support your man. Just support him. Be kind to him. Let him know that he's in a safe environment where he can speak to how he feels about things, where he doesn't have to feel resentment about who he is as a person, and doesn't have to feel guilt or shame about who he is as a person, that you can have an honest, open, loving relationship without judgment. That judgment doesn't have to be there, and that criticism, and this is a great point that Farrell brings up in his video, that criticism is a way of us seeing that other people love us and they want the best for us. So, if we are to speak biologically, even go into a biological thing on this particular topic, men have an extreme depth of feeling. They have an extremely deep, heavy depth of feeling and emotion. Men are just not necessarily that great at expressing that emotion, and we could argue that that's a societal thing, or it has to do with brain chemistry, it has to do with biology, it has to do with the corpus callosum, it has to do with all sorts of other things. We can make all sorts of arguments, but that gets away from the point that men don't express themselves very much. And I have a strong feeling that men don't express themselves very much because they feel like they are not in an environment where they can express themselves. And so we have to create that dialogue, we have to open that up, and we have to allow men to be strong in their feelings. And we have to allow men to be strong in a world where they are not required to kill themselves in order to be respected. That we're not requiring them to beat themselves up continuously in order to be respected. So that's it for that one. I'll list those other movies and how they relate to this particular topic on the next video that I'm gonna do here. And it's a review of the top 50 movies as ranked by people just out there that are top romances, and what these necessary romances have in common, and what they have to do with men and men making sacrifices, and how they have to do with men not being true to themselves and not being honest with themselves, and how their ultimate sacrifice is really what drives the entire romance. And it's not the case in some of them, and I'll speak to those as well, but we'll get into that a little bit. So I thank you for watching this, and I hope that this made you think a little bit. I hope that if you have children and you have little boys, that you think about these things with them, that you think about how you can encourage the way that they feel instead of trying to cover that up, because you don't want them to become as depressed as you may be as an adult. So I encourage you to do that. Please watch the other video. Check out that book, The Myth of Male Power. It's very eye-opening, and it's really humanizing, because I don't feel like there's enough voices out there that really are for men, not only because men are not speaking for themselves, but also because a lot of contemporary feminist culture, which really pervades a lot of different media outlets, does not support men speaking for themselves, because in order to speak for yourself, others may or may not think that you're just being defensive, and that means that you're just supporting a patriarchal structure and what it means to be in a patriarchy, which I don't really think exists, but we can get into that in a different video. So please, I encourage you to love each other. All right, Valentine's Day is tomorrow, so go out there, love each other, take care of each other, and respect one another. And if you respect one another, and you really open up dialogue with one another, and you really communicate with one another, you're going to start getting to the point where you're not judging the other person nearly as much. You're just accepting them. And as we talked about before in one of the other earlier videos, acceptance is the same as love. When you completely accept someone, you love them. So in order for us to completely accept someone, we have to stop thinking that everything is wrong with them. Okay. So, thank you for watching this. All right. Go out there, spread the love. If you're watching this, I love you too. All right. I will talk to you all later. Bye-bye.